go. I thought to myself, I was waking up in a sober moment, that time like an ever-flowing stream.
Bears all our years away.
Bears all our years away, thank you very much. They fly forgotten like a dream dies at the opening day. And I thought, well, today is annual meeting. And what is annual meeting for us except the yearly remembrance of ourselves as a community? The same community which gathered last year, and it gathered 10 years ago, and 50 years ago, and 100 years ago. The same community, like an ever-flowing stream. And that really is the truth of the life of the church. And it's the truth of how we find our meaning as a parish. That there is this ever-flowing stream that we are the inheritors of. And the church has always been made up of the motley group of people that this church is made up out of. And it's always been that way, and it always will be that way. It's made up of saints, and sinners, and most of all, people who are both saints and sinners. From generation to generation, this community goes on, stops, pauses once a year, looks around at itself, says who wants to lead us for the next year, and then plunges forward. Time, like an ever-flowing stream, bears all these years away, and they fly forgotten like a dream. Dies at the opening day, but doesn't make any difference because the next day is coming, and God is our help in ages past and our hope for years to come. That is the context in which we celebrate our parish life. And the gospel lesson today is really this inauguration of this entire movement. You know, these days it's popular to call the church the Jesus movement, we being the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement. Well, that movement finds its inaugural manifestation in the sermon that we just heard Jesus preach. In Luke, it's a rather different beginning to his ministry. He comes out of the wilderness. After having been baptized, he goes in the wilderness. He comes out of the wilderness. And we're told he travels around in Galilee. And his fame spreads, and he goes to synagogues and preaches. That's all we're told. We're not told what he says. But his fame develops. And the focal point of the story is when he comes to his hometown synagogue in Nazareth. And it's a two-part story. And we get the second part next week. What we get today is the sermon itself. And you can imagine the gathering. People are excited. This is Jesus who we grew up with. This is the guy from down the block. He's become famous. We hear he's a great preacher now. And we hear he has done marvelous things in other places. And let's go see what he's got. And so they show up to Sabbath worship, and he's there. And after the regular readings of the Torah, which they would have had, and the prayers, which they would have recited, then there is a sermon. In this case, they turn to Jesus, and they hand him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. And he unrolls the scroll. And he very deliberately chooses three passages which he strings together in what we have just heard. It's his deliberate choice of a text with which to begin his public ministry. And it begins by saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has sent me to preach good news to the poor, to bring good news to the poor, and to set the captive free, and to give sight to the blind, and to free all those who are oppressed, and to declare that this is the year in which that process begins. And then he sits down, and they look at him, and he says, today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. And that's all we get for this week. There'll be a reaction next week. So just think of what he's done. He's laid out the kind of manifesto of his ministry right here at the beginning. To bring good news to the poor, to set the captive free, to bring sight to the blind, to free the oppressed. For Jesus, this moment he uses to claim to be the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, to claim to be the fulfillment of the hope of the people of Israel. It is for Jesus a moment in which he says, this is the time when God is fulfilling all that has been promised. So he uses his sermon to claim to be a fulfillment, but not just a fulfillment. He uses it to claim an agenda for his ministry. His ministry is to bring good news to the poor and free the oppressed and set the captives free and give sight to the blind and to let people know that this is the moment of God's presence in the world. So it is both fulfillment and agenda for Jesus in this sermon. And that begins the Jesus movement. The Jesus movement which continues to this very day, to this very parish,